Welcome. Step into the silence that roars louder than applause, into the shadows that don't just follow, but consume. This is not your ordinary speech. This is a confrontation. This is not for the faint-hearted, not for the sugar-coated optimism you've been fed. Number. This is for the ones who carry the weight of consequences without blinking. This is for the ones who realize that to move forward, something or someone has to be left behind, buried not in the past but in silence. You didn't ruin their name, you erased their identity, and that, whether they understand it or not, was necessary. There's a line few ever dare to cross, a line where silence becomes justice, where withdrawal becomes weapon, and your absence is louder than your voice ever was. That's where you stood. And when they called it betrayal, when they said you were wrong, when they painted you as the villain in their collapsing narrative, they didn't understand. Because this wasn't about noise. This was about deletion. Not of a name, not of a title, of who they were to you. And in that, you took back your control. You didn't break the frame. You burned the portrait. You see, there's a difference between revenge and erasure. Revenge is loud, desperate, attention-hungry. Erasure is clean, sharp, final. Revenge wants to hurt. Erasure wants to forget. And when you made that choice, when you chose to disappear, to no longer speak their name, to treat them like a ghost in your world, you weren't being cruel. You were choosing power. You were building your future on ashes they thought would never burn. You were writing a new chapter without the ink of their lies staining the page. They told you that silence is weakness. They were wrong. Silence is the strategy of gods. It's the language of those who no longer need to explain themselves. And when you walked away, no explanation, no apology, no final argument. That was the loudest statement you could have made. You didn't just kill the connection. You murdered their reputation in your world. They didn't lose a friend. They lost their reflection. And now they're screaming into the void, trying to remember who they were before you. But it's gone. It's wiped. Because you were the only mirror that made them believe they were whole. Let's speak truth, real, raw, unapologetic. Some people survive only because you carry their name. Some reputations live only because you choose to forgive. Some identities remain intact only because you still whisper their stories. But when that whisper stops, when you turn, and silence is all that remains, they fade. Not publicly, not in headlines, but in identity. And that is the quietest destruction known to man. You didn't scream, you didn't rage, you just stopped. And in that stillness, you became dangerous. Because the most powerful thing you can do to someone who once depended on your light is to walk away with it still burning, leave them in the dark, not as punishment, but as proof. They were never the flame, you were. They'll say you changed, that you became cold, distant, heartless. But they don't realize. They never saw the slow death of your spirit while you were still smiling for their comfort. They missed every moment you swallowed your truth to protect their image. They were blind to the quiet sacrifices you made just to keep their name from collapsing under its own weight. You weren't cruel, you were crumbling. And when the final piece of you gave out, it wasn't rage that came next. It was nothingness, the void, a silence deeper than any scream. And in that silence, you erase them. Because sometimes, walking away isn't abandonment, it's resurrection. Not of them, of you. You killed the role they had written for you, the obedient shadow, the unthanked savior, the quiet protector of their legacy. You burned the script. And in that act, you didn't just ruin their name. You obliterated the illusion that they ever had power over your identity in the first place. Now they sit in circles of familiarity, repeating stories about who they think you were, trying to stitch together your absence with lies. But the truth eats at them in private. The truth gnaws at their memory. Because you didn't leave a wound, they don't even know where to place the scar. You vanished, not in weakness, but in ultimate clarity. You understood. Some people don't deserve a confrontation. They don't deserve your fury. They deserve to be forgotten. Erased, not from the world, but from your world. And once that choice is made, there is no coming back. This isn't about hate. Hate still gives them space in your mind. Hate still calls their name in the shadows. This is about nothing. The purest, darkest form of accountability. Because nothing is louder than no longer existing in someone's universe. Nothing is colder than being unwritten from a person's story. That is what you did, and they feel it, even if they can't name it. You didn't just close the chapter, you burned the entire book and built a new library in which their name was never printed. So let them talk. Let them say what they will. Because when the lights go down and the noise fades, they'll realize they're not being hated. They're being ignored. And that kind of silence, that's not distance. That's exile. A kind of exile they earned, not by what they did once, but by what they kept doing, believing you'd never leave, believing you'd never stop carrying their weight. But you did. You dropped it. And they're still trying to figure out how heavy they truly were. Let's be honest. They thought their name could survive anything. That their charm, their persona, their carefully curated identity was immune to consequence. But they underestimated one thing: you. They never imagined you'd be the one to bury their influence. Not with violence, not with a spectacle, but with something far more terrifying: your indifference. And now they live in a world where the only version of them that mattered has been deleted from you entirely. There is a terrifying kind of justice in that, a quiet execution. No jury, no verdict, just decision. And you made it, not out of bitterness, out of evolution. You realized their presence was no longer sustainable in the environment of your growth. You understood that their name, their voice, their story no longer had a seat at your table. And instead of waiting for them to catch up, you built a higher floor and removed the staircase. They might still be shouting from the ground, but you don't even hear them anymore. Not because you're avoiding them, but because they are simply not there. Not in your plans, not in your vision, not in your identity. You rewrote your soul's architecture, and their name wasn't in the blueprint. And that's what they'll never understand. You didn't ruin their reputation with slander. You didn't spread lies. You didn't weaponize secrets. You just stopped acknowledging their existence. And in doing so, you stole the only thing they truly valued, their identity as it existed in your eyes. Because the truth is, some people don't want to be good. They just want to be seen as good. They feed off perception. They thrive in borrowed light. And when you took your light back, they weren't exposed. They were extinguished. You didn't ruin their name. You revealed it for what it always was: hollow, borrowed, inflated by your forgiveness, your sense, your protection. But not anymore. So now they wander through their own story, trying to find themselves in it without you. But you were the one who made it all make sense. You were the interpreter of their chaos, the silent editor who cleaned up their mess, the one who kept their identity intact when it began to unravel. They mistook your grace for obligation. They mistook your loyalty for weakness, and they paid the price. Not with drama, not with explosion, but with a slow, suffocating erasure that even they can't reverse. Because you weren't just someone who knew them, you were the only one who truly saw them. And now, no one does. Their audience has changed. Their mirror is gone. And what's left is a shell. Walking through rooms, trying to prove they still exist in stories that no longer fit. You didn't ruin their name. You removed the lens that made them worth looking at. And without you, they're just noise in the distance. Familiar, but unimportant. Here's the part they'll never say out loud. They need someone to blame. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. Right to walk away. Right to stop pouring water into a broken cup. Right to say this ends with me. They don't miss you because they loved you. They miss you because your presence was their permission slip to pretend. To pretend they were better, wiser, kinder. You were the credibility they wore like armor. And when you walked away, you didn't just take your presence, you took their protection. And still, through all their projections, all their silent accusations, all the rehearsed stories they tell the world, you stay silent. Why? Because you don't need to defend what's already buried. You don't need to shout about what no longer lives. And that's the most terrifying part of all. They keep throwing words like weapons, but they're swinging at shadows. You're not even in the arena anymore. You're above it. You've outgrown the conflict. You didn't win the war. You made it irrelevant. And in that transformation, you did something more powerful than revenge. You denied them immortality. Their name will fade in your story. Their face will blur. Their voice will lose shape. Because when you rewrite your life, the characters who no longer serve the plot aren't killed. They're forgotten. And that's the greatest deletion of all. People think erasure is cruelty, but erasure is clarity. Erasure is the honest answer to a dishonest presence. You didn't do it to hurt them. You did it to heal you. Because you finally saw what they were. Not evil, but empty. Not malicious, but manipulative. Not strong, but dependent on your strength to feel powerful. And when you left, they didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves they only saw in your eyes. You were the architect of their illusion, and now that illusion is dust. They called you dramatic, cold, too much. But what they couldn't admit was how much they relied on your warmth, your protection, your forgiveness. You were their safety net, and they cut holes in it thinking it would still catch them. But you're gone, and now they're falling. Not because you pushed them, but because they were never standing on solid ground to begin with. You didn't ruin them. You just stepped back and let the truth reveal itself. And now you rise. Not because you're untouched, but because you chose healing over performance. Because you chose evolution over explanation. Because you realize that your energy is sacred, and some names don't deserve to be carried in your voice anymore. You didn't ruin their name. You simply stopped giving it value. Look around. There's a quiet kind of power in the way your life now breathes without them. In the peace that replaced the chaos. In the space that used to be filled with their needs, their demands, their drama. Now filled with your purpose, your growth, your clarity. That's the beauty of erasure. It doesn't just remove them. It returns you to yourself. They may still speak. They may still reach. They may still pretend. But you know better now. You don't need to respond. You don't need to react. You've reached a level of freedom that doesn't include an audience. Your path no longer passes through their terrain, and that, in its own quiet way, is your loudest victory. You were never meant to carry someone else's identity on your back. You were never supposed to be the background to their performance. You are the story. You are the page. You are the ink. And when you chose to erase them, it wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of creation. You made room for your real self. You reclaimed the narrative. So now, you look in the mirror and something is different. Not just the absence of their influence, not just the stillness where their noise used to echo, but something far more important. You see yourself clearly, fully, maybe for the first time in years. And that's when you realize they were never the main villain. They were the distraction, the noise, the fog that blurred your reflection just enough for you to doubt your own form. They didn't break you, they clouded you. And now the fog is gone. You've remembered who you were before they redefined you, before you started shrinking yourself to make them feel taller, before you started bending your voice so they could sleep peacefully in their lies. You didn't ruin their name. You saved your own. You recovered the version of you that didn't apologize for being powerful, for being bright, for being real. Let the world believe what it wants. They'll say, "You changed." That's fine. Let them whisper. Let them tilt their heads in concern and wonder where your softness went. But what they'll never understand is that this new version of you isn't heartless. It's healed. It doesn't cry for apologies. It doesn't crave closure. It doesn't seek recognition. It simply moves forward, quietly, unstoppably. Because once you've learned how to walk without them, you begin to run. And in that run, you shed every version of yourself that needed their approval, every piece of you that begged for their validation, every echo that still carried their name. You stopped needing to be understood. You stopped needing to be liked. And in that brutal, beautiful shift, you became dangerous in the way that peace often is, calm, certain, untouchable. This is where the world gets uncomfortable. When someone erases what was toxic, not with fire, but with indifference, not with a fight, but with full silence. They don't know how to handle that. Because drama is easy to judge. Explosions are easy to point at. But when you choose nothing, when you walk away, delete the thread, close the chapter and never look back, you become unreadable, unpredictable, unshakable. And that's what you are now. Unshaken. There is no return, no reopening of that door, no second invitation. They burned the bridge thinking you'd build it again. But this time, you didn't bring wood. You brought wings. And once you learn how to fly above the chaos, why would you ever crawl back into the fire? They'll never admit this, but they feel it. Every time your name is mentioned in a room, and they have to pretend it doesn't sting. Every time someone asks where you went, and they scramble to tell a version that paints them innocent. Every time they see you thriving without a trace of their influence, and it silences the lies they told themselves to sleep at night. That's the real punishment. Your absence is louder than your presence ever was. You didn't ruin their name. You simply stopped protecting it. You let it fall under the weight of its own lies. And now, whatever remains of their image is scattered and fragile, searching for a new host to survive in. But not you. Not anymore. You're done hosting parasites. Let them rebuild. Let them try. But this time, they'll have to do it without you. And without the illusion of who they were in your life, there's nothing for them to lean on. No more borrowed identity, No more reflected glory, just silence, just space, just truth. And what about you? You're not just surviving, you're transforming. This pain didn't destroy you, it cleared the way. And now there's room for something real, room for friendships that don't demand your silence, room for relationships that don't require your sacrifice, room for a self that doesn't need to justify its brilliance to anyone. Because when you erase their identity from your life, you made space for your own. And this identity, the one forged in silence, risen from deletion, born from reclamation, it's not fragile. It doesn't waver. It doesn't bend for comfort. It stands, alone if necessary, proud always. You are no longer the version of yourself who needed to be needed. You don't barter your worth for love. You don't tolerate disrespect disguised as closeness. And most importantly, you don't carry names that don't deserve to be remembered. That is the power you hold now, and this is where you stay. Not in bitterness, not in vengeance, but in balance, in sovereignty, in truth. You aren't loud about your growth because it doesn't need to be announced. It's seen, it's felt. And to the ones who once mistook your silence for weakness, they now understand. Your silence was the beginning of their end. They say a person dies 2 deaths. Once when their body is buried, and once when their name is spoken for the last time. You gave them both. And you did it without lifting a single weapon. Just a boundary, just a decision, just a step away. That's not weakness, that's legacy. And now, here you stand, not broken, not angry, not even grieving. You are still, unbothered, whole. Not because the war didn't leave wounds, but because you stopped giving the pain permission to speak. You stopped romanticizing what tried to consume you. And most of all, you stopped carrying the identity of someone who ever needed them to see your worth. You erased their identity not out of hate, but out of truth, out of necessity, out of the brutal realization that some people are only alive in the echo of your voice, in the light of your presence, in the kindness you extended that they mistook as weakness. You didn't just stop talking about them, you unmade them. You refused to be the soil where their false image could grow, and without you, they had nowhere left to stand. Understand this, what you did, it takes power, it takes precision. Most will never get it, most won't even try, because it's easier to shout, it's easier to perform your rage for an audience, to act like the wounded, noble victim. But you didn't choose the spotlight. You chose the shadow that became a furnace, that burned everything false and left only what was real. And what's real now is you. Not the version of you they tolerated, not the version you molded to make them feel safe, not the watered down version they applauded because it didn't threaten their comfort. Number. This you, the final version, is built from silence, carved by clarity, and untouchable by anything that once needed your permission to survive. There's no going back. Not because you're hard, but because you're healed. And healing, real healing, doesn't make space for people who only loved your brokenness. You erase them because the truth is, they weren't just part of your pain, they were its architect. And you can forgive the storm, but you don't keep living in the wreckage. Now they're looking for closure. They're digging through old messages, waiting for old patterns, hoping your silence is a phase, but what they don't realize is that silence was your answer, the final one. You didn't leave a door open. You sealed it, locked it, and burned the building, all without saying a single word. Because the most powerful endings don't need announcements. They don't need dramatic exits. They're just done. Quiet. Final. Unarguable. That's what you gave them. And it terrified them more than anything you could have said. Here's the truth. Most will never say out loud, you became the consequence. Not with fury, not with vengeance, just with removal, just with evolution. And that is the most terrifying justice of all, to become so healed, so whole, so unreachable, that they have no idea how to find the version of you they once fed on. You've become untouchable, not because you're guarded, but because you're rooted, no longer chasing, no longer explaining, no longer hoping they'll finally see it. They had their chance.